The drive, no pun intended, by Ed Miliband to eradicate the country of all cars that are powered by internal combustion engines by 2030 is still in place. This is his diktat, his wish, and including seemingly hybrid cars also, so anything with a petrol or a diesel engine. So let's be clear, there's only 5 years away. Of course, there are all sorts of issues with this. It's pointless, because even if every single car was electric, it would have no bearing on the effect on the planet whatsoever. But also the manufacturers, of course, themselves of cars generally, having been subjected to these targets, these numbers that the government have imposed on them, where the percentage of electric vehicles has to be of a particular level compared to total output. The manufacturers, of course, are saying that that is completely impractical and unsustainable when it comes to that meeting demand. In other words, car buyers, car drivers haven't got the memo. Well, look, let's talk about this in some more detail now with Ross Clark, who is author of Not Zero. I'll say that again, Not Zero, and how an irrational target will impoverish you, help China, and won't even save the planet. I think, Ross, you've just summed it up in the title of your book.
Good morning, Russell.
Good morning.
Yes, so if we just rewind a few weeks on this story, I mean, if you remember, Stellantis, which is a parent group of Vauxhall, announced it's going to close the Luton plant as a result of this thing called the zero-emission vehicle mandate, which demanded that 22% of cars sold last year were pure electric. This year it'll be 28%, rising to 80% by 2030. And the car manufacturers have having supported that ZEV initially, are now warning that it's killing their industry. Now, the government a few weeks ago said, well, look, we'll review the rules on the phase-out of petrol and diesel vehicles, leading us to believe that they're going to relax the sort of targets a bit. But, you know, it now seems that that's not necessarily actually going to be the case. And yesterday, this group called Electric Vehicles UK, which is a trade body for sort of electric car industry, was imploring the government to go back to what had been the previous government's initial policy of banning all petrol and diesel cars by 2030, which is just 5 years away. And, you know, given the low demand for electric vehicles, it's virtually impossible to see how they're suddenly going to pick up all this interest in just 5 years, the point when, you know, we'd all be happy buying electric vehicles, which of course we won't be, because they cost too much to buy, and if you don't have your own driveway, your own facility for recharging, it can be very expensive to run.
Ross, let's look at the reality, shall we, of non-combustion engine vehicles. This ideology, really, this kind of climate lunacy that is being enforced upon the consumer. The consumer, in terms of what they want, is completely out of step with the likes of Ed Miliband and others that are insisting that this higher and higher proportion of cars that are manufactured and sold in the UK are electric. Let's just look at the reality of the consumer-led response to this. So we have electric vehicles that are generally more expensive in the first place. They are also more expensive to insure. That's because if they have accidents and the accident damages the battery, that is a significant cost in terms of repair. So therefore, obviously, the risk in financial terms is higher. But the other big issue is because the government, of course, tried to incentivise people to buy electric vehicles by way of giving people 100% tax deductibility. So in other words, buy an electric vehicle for £50,000, get £50,000 off your tax bill, I think going back 3 or 4 years. So a wonderful tax swerve, which obviously won't last, that will be curtailed. But the fact is then that when all of those cars go back on the market in number, there is not the appetite for those as used cars, because of course the incentive is on the new cars by way of that tax deductibility. So the consequence, and this should have been worked out, one would imagine, is that the depreciation level on electric cars. I mean, and some of them, I'll take the Porsche Taycan, by the way, as an example, loses up to 50% of its value in year one. Now, who on earth is going to buy a car for £100,000 knowing that in year one it's going to lose £50,000 of its value? And presumably, by way of the law of school economics even, if more and more cars are forced upon the consumer, they'll have to be discounted even more, which means that depreciation will be even higher.
Yes, I mean, it got worse. It wasn't just the company car, Perks rather. For years, the government was offering £4,000 grants towards buying electric cars. It was enormous wad of money that's coming out of
the taxpayers' pocket.
Ordinary taxpayers were being forced to subsidise the sort of, green dreams of this relatively wealthy group of the population who are able to afford an electric car. And, if you want people to drive electric cars, and I mean, there's every reason why we should want to move to cleaner vehicles. If you want to encourage that, you've got to get the technology to a stage where the cars are selling themselves, where people actually want to buy them. Now, in China, China has got a large electric car industry. There's a lot of people buy electric cars in China now, but they didn't get there by the government banning petrol and diesel. They got there because the manufacturers out there had really concentrated on bringing down the costs of manufacturing electric vehicles.
So the consumer price was cheaper, and therefore, by way of a free market, ironically in China, those cheaper vehicle prices attracted genuine buyer interest.
Yes, and that's the same for all green technology. And we've got this similar thing on houses with heat pumps and so on. The heat pumps are not selling themselves because they cost too much to buy and too much to run. They can cost more to heat your house that way than it does with a gas boiler. And very few people are going to want to sort of make an investment in that sort of situation where they know it's actually going to cost them money. And
Ross, just a last question. If every vehicle in Britain was an electric vehicle, what difference would it make to the planet in terms of climate change?
Well, virtually none, because, for one thing, electric vehicle is not zero emission, really. I mean, no...
Well, the power has to come from somewhere.
Come out the tailpipe, but in the manufacturing process, they actually involve more carbon emissions than a petrol and diesel car, and you've got to drive for maybe 15,000 miles.
It's an absolute racket. Ross Clark, author of Not Zero, thank you very much indeed.